But most importantly, thank you so much to you all for coming. This isn't really so much about launching the book, it's really an opportunity for me to say thank you to all the people that have helped me in this journey. And I know that some of you spent maybe the best part of the last 3 years asking me how it's been going. I've not really had much of an update, and so on. You probably thought, is it really going to come? Is it really going to be next time? Well, thankfully, one July day in the year of 2023, it finally appeared. And it's been a labour of love, more labour than love, I have to say. But I am very pleased with the final product, and I'm delighted that it's available, and I'm really grateful to you all for your help. Encouragement, coffee in some cases, gentle chiding, appearances on podcasts, proofreading, and so on. It's all been really, really important, and I am really grateful. So thank you very much.
I wanted to say, Akhil, just on behalf of your parents and on everybody else, and also for Phil, saying when I asked Phil, how's Akhil's book coming? And he'll be like, oh, I don't know. And just thank God it's over. And so that's a rib taking out of the way, mate. But when I first read this a few months ago, then I realised why it took so long. Because it is, I think, one thing I've learned, and when Phil was saying he's thinking of buying Shepherd Walwyn, I said, mate, open a restaurant, it's easier. Because publishing is the worst business you can go into, because you just never know if something's going to work out or not, if something's going to be a bestseller. But if a book deserves to be a bestseller in this area, then in my opinion it's this one. So fingers crossed, and I know you've got a lot of hard work on the way as well as hard work going. So first of all, mate, why are we in this room and in this building?
Yeah, so I did choose this venue quite deliberately. So some of you may know that among the more unusual interests that I have, I spend Saturday mornings translating Latin, the work of a Renaissance philosopher. And until the pandemic, a group led by Andrew very ably, until the pandemic we used to meet here on Saturday mornings. And I came across the economics course, and the economics course that is studied in this building, the School of Philosophy and Economic Science, describes the work of an American economist called Henry George, who wrote in the 19th century, and he analysed the boom-bust cycle and why inequality is seemingly endemic to our economies. And so I kind of became very interested in that, and there's a wonderful bookshop downstairs, lovingly curated by Gordon, and I bought a lot of actually Shepherd Walwyn publications over the years. And I really sort of got into economics. And then the financial crisis happened, and the Queen went to LSE and she said, why did no one see it coming? And she got a response that was, not very good in my view. And I was thinking, well, there are people who have, really understood how the economic system works, and yet they're not being discussed publicly. And then I think, sort of in the aftermath of that crisis, one morning I was down in the bookshop and I came across this book with has to be said, a fairly funny front cover called The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking by an Australian with the name of Philip J. Anderson. And it used the sort of knowledge of the cycle, which by now I discovered lasts on average 18 years. And it traced the entire history of the United States from 1800s to present through the lens of this 18-year cycle. And it shows how the economy repeats and how you get these periods of boom and people think, oh, this is a new era and you've never seen this before, and then you have a massive crisis and people say, oh, we couldn't have predicted this. And I thought this is exactly what people should be reading. So I contacted Phil soon after that, and I said, if you're ever doing another book or some research, let me know. I've got half a brain. I'd like to help you. And so we started collaborating, and over the years we did a lot of different projects, and in 2019 we set up our subscriber service, Property Sharemarket Economics, and our mission is to help our subscribers remember the future, because the future is based on cycles of repetition of the past. Certainly the forces that drive us through boom and bust haven't changed. And so you can, say something useful to people just based on that. And that's how we got started. And to a certain extent, all of that happened in this building. So yeah, it's very important for me that we would be marking this occasion in this room.
And given all the books in the bookshop and at Shepherd Walwyn, what would it have prompted the need to write this one?
Well, there's a few things. I'd have to say, so I've got some of my school friends here, and we were all introduced to Henry George back at school. I think, maybe I was paying attention and you were paying less attention at moments. I don't know. No, it's in all seriousness. So the point is I'm not, in a sense, really writing anything new. This was described in the late 19th century by Henry George. There was an English economist called Fred Harrison who was what are known as Georgists, people who follow the works of Henry George. He rediscovered the cycle in the 70s and used it in 83 to predict the crisis in 1990. And then there's of course Phil and a few other sort of fairly prominent economists who have written all you need to know about the cycle. I think the reason that I thought there was a bit of a gap was, so in 2009, 2010, during the financial crisis, so my family's business, we're in wholesaling pharmaceuticals, and what banks do in a crisis is that they call loans from small businesses to shore up their balance sheets. And it's actually probably the worst thing they could do, because the majority of people in an economy are employed in small businesses, and actually it's often large businesses that need to kind of fail and have a creative destruction, which is the hallmark of our system. But banks don't want to deal with having to dispose of the large property portfolios that these companies have, and so what they do is they keep such businesses going, and small businesses are the ones that pay the price. In any case, it sort of created a number of issues for our family, which to a certain extent reverberate today. And I said it can't be right that with all this knowledge we can't be prepared for these crises which seem to happen so regularly. And so I wanted to develop a body of knowledge that would enable us to prepare, to take advantage of the good times in a prudent way, not to go overboard, and then to be prepared for the next crisis, because it seemed to me inevitable that there would be one, and I wanted us and other people to be ready. And so that's the kind of the gap that I saw, is really distilling the insights from all these amazing authors and making some practical use out of it. And so I've structured the book as a journey through a full 18-year cycle. I break it down into several stages. I explain why the cycle happens, why no one seems to see it, how various features of it work, and then at the end of each chapter I say, well, here's what you do about it.
Brilliant. And there's some superbly practical advice at the end of each chapter. Now I'm just we mentioned, we joked about how long the process took, and having written a couple of books myself, I know the process, and the Churchill quote about writing a book starting off as a mistress, and then they become more tempestuous, and then basically you throw it to the audience before it kills you. So I just wondered if you'd take us through the process of how you came to write what we consider to be such a great book.
So I approached Harman House, my publisher, at the start of 2020. I think, Tim, you provided the initial introduction to Craig Pearce, who's my editor. And actually they were quite keen, and I knew they would be, because they like sort of cycles and they like finance and economics. And I sort of, by that point I'd been, this was May 2020, I'd been writing a newsletter for about 4 years. And I thought all that would be required would be to take a few newsletters, do a bit of editing, write an introduction, do some sort of bridge sections between the chapters, and by December 2020, and I did say this in the contract, by December 2020 you'll have the first draft. Needless to say, it took a bit longer than that. And yeah, I mean, probably at no point did I feel particularly comfortable with the process. Within about sort of 2 days, I decided that the structure that we had agreed with the publisher was totally wrong. And it took me about 6 months to sort of figure out what would work. And actually, interestingly, I was watching I don't know if anyone's seen the Netflix documentary about the Michael Jordan final season. It's called The Last Dance. Yeah? I was watching that and I thought, here's the structure for the book. So what it does is it goes through the last season, it's The Last Dance, and then it flashes back to how the teams formed, how the various characters who were driving the action in the last season, what their sort of agenda was, and how they fit in. I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to take the reader through a journey through an 18-year cycle, and then at each point, I'm going to describe the next stage of the action, and then we're going to go off on a tangent, if you will, to explain different features of it. Anyway, it took me 6 to 8 months to come up with that. I then, once we reopened, so you would think that lockdown is a great time to be writing a book, but actually it's the worst time to be writing. The last thing you want to do, having spent 8 hours on Zoom, is spend another couple of hours writing. It was more interesting to me to open the fridge and open a can of beer, and then no writing was possible after that. So that was lockdown. Then it reopened. Of course, I didn't want to spend any further time at home in the evening, so that delayed things a little bit. And so yeah, it took as long as it took. I would say though that at no point in the process did it not quite considerably improve what became the final product. So it took a bit of time, but that helped me sort of digest some of it better. I had interesting conversations with people who had made me think again. The world was moving on out of the pandemic. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's happening, and that actually helped from my point of view, because you could kind of see the underlying forces and to a certain extent discount the sort of surface news, and that helped me sort of frame the later stages of the book, which are current to now, so you can read those, and they're actually deliberately written to provide a guide to kind of what's happening now and what's coming next.
Yeah, definitely. And so if you were going to do a brief description to say what the book's about, how would you describe it?
Journey through an 18-year cycle, and a practical investment guide to the future. So 9 stages of the cycle, and I use I use a different historical episode to illustrate each stage. I tell people what to look out for. I tell them what to do as a result of each of things that happen at that stage, and then in between those stages, I explain, why the cycle happens, why land is so important to it, why no one sees it. In fact, that's my favourite chapter. Chapter 5 is called "The Corruption of Economics." How banks and governments fit in. There's also a brief detour on how to stay safe, because one thing you get towards the end of the cycle, which is sort of where we are now, is you get a lot of con artists coming up and telling you why you should invest in schemes, and I give people some ideas on how to stay safe and how to spot the scammers. So yeah, it's a practical guide, hopefully, to the future.
And what is your take on the cycle?
So, well, you probably picked up by now there's an 18-year cycle. And I think, probably I should refer back to Phil's Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, because this book really changed the way that I view the world. And I think it's fair to say you finished writing in 2008?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so right at the peak of the last cycle. So everything since then is kind of from his point of view, from the point of view of his book, being in the future, and it's repeated like clockwork.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well,
so, and this despite that, there's no era where it's repeated exactly as the previous one. What you really need to understand is the underlying forces that drive our economies through boom and bust, and I think we do that quite successfully between both our books and what we do for our subscribers. And so the current cycle started kind of around 2011, 2012. There's no one day when it starts as a process. It's usually 14 years up and 4 and a bit years down. And so you just add 14 to 2011, 2012, and you would be expecting a peak in 2026. And I know the news in the UK in particular is in my view unnecessarily gloomy, but I mean there is a major global boom going on, and it's starting to really get ridiculous in a lot of places around the world. And the next 2 years are going to see more of the same thing. I mean, you know, we sort of maybe slightly insulated from it because we have sort of this predilection for negativity in this country. It's slightly different to other countries, but it's kind of ridiculous how much things are repeating. And one of the chapters in the book that describes the current phase of the cycle, I actually use the 1840s as the historical example, because in that era you had the railways that were suddenly the rage in terms of investments. It's not like the railways were invented in 1842, but suddenly everyone wanted to own a piece of railway stock because this was the new technology. I mean, it fundamentally changed society. I mean, probably no technology is ever going to have the same impact as the railway. And not AI, crypto, whatever. I mean, the idea that it would take you 3 weeks to go from one side of the US to the other, and then suddenly it was 3 days. I mean, that sort of epoch-defining technology I don't think we've ever seen since then. Nonetheless, you know, it created this massive manias, all this sort of thing. People were worried about regulations, and everyone needed to own a piece of an AI company. All the CEOs of railway stocks said, "Oh yes, we're doing something related to railways." Very similar to how CEOs of any company, be they technology or whatever, are saying AI is the future and so on. And so you can see this massive mania building in the next 2 to 3 years. So, as far as I'm concerned, we are very much repeating the cycle, and there'll be quite an interesting, quite a turbulent 2 or 3 years ahead of us.
And you know, and I've been in the rooms with friends, and so people are already educated. And then I remember we were in the city last October, right? And Phil stood up and gave his talk and called, as it turned out, he called the bottom of the market.
Yep.
Which turned out to be exactly true. And I had this look of disbelief on people's faces. Who were like, who is this tramp, this Australian tramp, telling me impossible things?
I was wearing a suit.
As always, I didn't know he was an Australian tramp, whereas Akhil always looks like James Bond. I have got when's your next book? It could be, well actually Jonathan, I want to announce I'm going to be James Bond. And he called it, and I just said, looked at people and said, look, I said I've been with Phil now since 2008-9. I said, and he does this. I said, he'll tell you stuff that you think is unbelievable, but just listen, observe, notice, and then get back in touch if it's true. And that's been the same with both of you, being, you know, with the predictions that you've made, which are officially impossible. But then Fred's, you know, original Fred Harrison stuff was originally impossible, and he's done that. So who is it that the book, would you say, is most aimed at?
I mean, there's two main audiences. I mean, the first are the sorts of people who subscribe to our services. They're sort of, I think, you know, they're sort of quite interested in sort of economics and finance and want to take charge of their own sort of affairs. I mean, I've got some subscribers in the audience, maybe they can say, and I think they have at some point, please do correct me if I'm wrong, I think at some point you've come to the view that what you've either learned or what you read in the papers doesn't quite make sense, which is essentially how I felt about things in 2009. And so I think they very much will, I hope, read the book, find it interesting, absorb it, and I won't probably have to do too much persuading to get them to read it. But I have tried to make it quite readable. I mean, it's not a simple book by any means. I tried to distill a lot of insights, but present it quite simply. And hopefully for that reason, it gets a slightly wider readership, because ultimately we're all affected by the cycle, and so we all really need, I think, to at least consider the possibility that you can prepare and be ready and take charge of your affairs.
And is that just the whole thing about the readiness? Is that what you want people to get from it?
Yeah. Even a sort of a sense of confidence, security, peace of mind, all these things, but even just sort of knowing that there is potentially a way of reading the economic rules and not necessarily going to the herd mentality. Even if you don't decide that you're going to buy Bitcoin or short banking stocks and from next financial crisis, just knowing that actually even in the darkest times there is always an end point. If you can just survive to that point, things will be fine.
And I know, I mean, we were with Fred last week, and he's never been more bleak, I think, about the way of what's coming, and then some of the challenges that we've got ahead. So I will get to that, where you see it going. But where do you see us right now in the cycle? Because you were talking earlier just about it, we're going into a big boom, even though the British media will tell you the opposite. I mean, this week we are going to get burned alive if we go to Spain or Greece for a holiday. It's going to be 72 degrees Celsius apparently.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's not to say that there aren't problems. Of course there are. There are always issues. I mean, every country at any point has enormous issues with inequality, people who are not able to, have to make the sort of desperate choice between heating their homes and putting food on the table. The idea that this has suddenly come up in the last 6 months, and as the news flips, will suddenly disappear in the next 6 months, as you'll see when the news media becomes obsessed with something else, is just fundamentally incorrect. I think so we are the final couple of years of the cycle to a peak, which we've consistently said would be around 2026, and we've said this for the last 12, 13 years, and nothing that's happened since then has made us change our views in any way. The final 2 years are the most kind of turbulent, the most ridiculous. You'll see some utterly ridiculous things going on, building higher, the first mile high building. Tallest building is always a good significator of the peak of the cycle. You'll see some ridiculous price paid for an artwork in an auction. Everyone's sort of obsessed by the latest celebrity. Elon Musk will be tweeting God knows what, and so on. And so this is what's coming ahead. I think it's now time for us to be a bit sober and a bit boring, if I could use that word, not really go with the hype, and so on. And then when things are really fearful, to be on the front foot and be prepared.
I know Fred always talks about the buyer's curse stage,
Winner's curse. Yeah.
Winner's curse going into that.
Yeah. But Fred is generally relatively easy chap. So I should. The reason for that is, this guy is. He's the reason why we're sitting in this room today. So in just to go back a bit, there was an American economist called Homer Hoyt in the 1930s who actually was the first person to properly discover the 18-year cycle by looking at land values in Chicago. And he actually doubted the cycle had continued after the Second World War. And Fred Harrison did an amazing piece of detective work in the 70s to actually identify the cycle being reset. So the only thing in 250 years of history that's even come close to interrupting the cycle of the two world wars. But Fred rediscovered it. He wrote a book, which is at the back over there, called The Power and the Land, in 1983, which essentially sort of told people how it works, and then said, by the end of the decade, we'll have a major crisis. And we don't think of the late 80s, early 90s as a crisis period, but those times were pretty difficult. And it was particularly difficult in the country which had the biggest boom, which was Japan, which I write about in chapter 10 of the book. Chapter 12, sorry. And so in addition to all of that, Fred, following the work of Henry George, he had the solution as to how to solve this problem of boom and bust, change this taxation system. Fred has been campaigning for this for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
And he said after 60 years of campaigning, less people know about Henry George than when I started. so he's entitled, I think, to feel quite grumpy about it, given his track record is unimpeachable, and he's put out all this stuff all this time. It's very accessible. It's on YouTube. He doesn't have a service. He doesn't exclude anyone from it. He's written many books, so he's entitled to feel quite grumpy. In addition to that, he feels that at the end of the current cycle, 4 different, what he calls existential crises, will be converging. So climate crisis, the crisis of migration, which will really sort of fracture Western societies because it's such a hot topic and it creates such internal problems. And obviously the economic crisis, the downturn, the 18-year cycle. And there's one other which I can't remember. But he doesn't see how we might get out of that. Fair point, maybe. I don't know. Our politics over the last 10 years have been turbulent, and we haven't been able to solve any of these major problems. So that's a possibility. I tend to think, if everyone is talking about the possibility of crises, I just have a sort of fairly contrarian way of looking at things. I tend to feel that probably there's something else going on which might reveal itself when the time is right. But it's definitely true to say that we are in for a very turbulent decade. So it's not emotionally, it's not going to be a particularly easy thing to navigate. And this is another reason why.
Well, I think that maybe with some of the stuff we spoke with Michael Hudson last year, and we were talking just about the accelerating de-dollarization process, and it was just at the start of the Ukraine conflict. And what we couldn't believe in a couple of months later was just how fast and how much de-dollarization has accelerated. So this move of prosperity from the West to the rest of the world. So that might be one of the forces that Fred was talking about, and so in that sense, it's like, well, it can feel like where I was in Japan in the 90s and stuff, and it was still a nice place to be, but obviously the world moved away from them and where their prosperity was, and it didn't feel like that anyone else was having a boom because we won, right? Or they won, and it's the chance that we won. So I guess there's that challenge there. And what I do love about this book is the possibility, and I think thinking about chapter 5 in particular, the way in which he wove together so many, like basically 3 books in one chapter, and did it in such an elegant and conversational way. Phil and I were both going, chapter 5, mate, chapter 5, we've put it on. But all the other chapters, they're all still very well written, but you've just taken all these ideas. And I think that the best thing is the more people know about this, then the more people there are to say, when the politicians and the economists stand up and say, you couldn't have predicted this has never happened before, it's unprecedented, and all the usual BS that they come out with, there'll be more of us to say, hang on a second, mate, we gave you this book 5 years ago, and if you didn't read it, that's your problem, but,
So that's a cue for you to buy the book, tell all your friends to buy the book, tell all their friends to buy the book.
So what are you, on joking aside, that everyone's going to get this for Christmas, and all your families have to, you've made your family buy it, and also fund the launch by the sound of it with labour and everything else. But what are your plans for the book?
I don't know if I've got it in me to write another one. So this is it, I think. Back to chapter 5. I do feel there is material in there that could work as a documentary or a podcast series or something to try and get it out to a wider audience. And if nothing else, I don't know the first thing about documentaries or podcasts, so it will be quite an interesting challenge to think through what might make for an interesting alternative way of presenting the material, and that could then be a gateway into some of the other points that I make in the book.
And the actual the book sales on this sound to be, from my own point of view, having looked at Shepherd Walwyn's book sales, they're looking extraordinary so far. And I know they're not sold yet. They're just advance sales in anticipation of it. But what else have you got planned for publicising the book launch?
I mean, I don't know what to do other than tweet about it. So if anyone's got ideas, please do let me know. If you want to see. Yeah, it's actually, I'm finding it. So I found writing it a bit of a challenge, but tweeting about it is even more of a challenge. It's not something that I particularly enjoy, I have to say. Yeah, no, I'm going to appear on as many sort of podcasts and other things as I can over the next year. I'll give myself a year to really push it out there. Yeah, I don't know what else. What else does one do? I'm not going to do any stunts like walking naked down Oxford Street, wearing the book.
We're all
wearing the book
grateful,
cover.
we're all grateful for that, I think. So before we wrap up, mate, are there any questions?
Thanks for watching. Want to know more? Join our Property Cycle Investor newsletter. You'll get exclusive access to our new uploads on YouTube. Click here to watch our other videos.